Kartik, let's bring you in. Now, I want to actually understand from you, and there's something very, very significant. We've sort of touched upon it earlier, but the fact that there are sanctions on Russia at the moment, US sanctions on Russian oil majors, and the fact that there has been a public statement which says that Russia has sort of, dealt with sanctions earlier and knows how to get its way around it. But what I want to understand from you is this entire narrative which the West has built about India and China funding Russia's war in Ukraine. How valid is that? Because given the fact that our total trade with Russia is just about $68 billion, of which India's imports are about $63 billion. I'm saying even if about $52 billion go towards oil, crude oil, Russian crude oil, is that sort of enough to fund years-long worth of war with another country? So how valid is that argument really?
No, so I would just call that a manufactured narrative, right? I think it's manufactured to suit political statements and political points. If you look at what happened after the sanctions were imposed on Russia, in fact, the role India and China played was to actually step in and purchase Russian oil and cool down oil markets, which have actually benefited both the US and the Europe. And in fact, 80-90% of the Russian oil which comes to India gets again refined and exported back to European Union. So again, it's a lot of rhetoric, it's a lot of talking points. Yeah. I don't think it is nice to say politically that there is China and there's another bad boy in the corner called India who we can punish. I think that narrative has also run its course. I don't see a lot of countries talking about it anymore. Maybe the Americans will still talk about it a couple of times, but I think there is a lot of understanding that you're dealing with mature democracies who take careful strategic decisions. I think if you look at the Prime Minister's position here, we've constantly advocated for peace, including in the Prime Minister's conversation with Mr. Putin at the sidelines of a G20 summit, talking about the time for peace. So I think let's ignore the narrative, let's ignore the rhetoric. I think what is very clear is that there has to be a path for the war to end. Yeah. I think the US and the Russians and the Ukrainians are the three parties discussing the end to the war. The Europeans unfortunately don't have a seat at the table directly for this conversation, which is unfortunate, which also is a reflection of the growing or the demeaning importance of the European Union and Europe in general. But I think as long as there is a path towards peace, a lot of these things will get resolved out. I think the role India can play is to be Vishwamitra, which is be friends with everyone, continue to do with business with everyone. I do expect that the European Union FTA will get signed before Republic Day in January, or at least get announced before the Republic Day. I think January 27th has been the timeline committed. So I think India is right where it should be in adopting a very balanced, fair posture towards these developments. And again, while there is political rhetoric, there is nothing which dissuades us from doing what is right strategically for us and also right for the economy.
Right. Of course, Kartik, sometime back you were saying that it's too early to call RIC a bloc just as yet, but I want to throw that open to Rakesh. Now, Rakesh, with the fact that we were talking about G8, we were talking about G7 with Russia out, and now you're talking about G2, which is US and China. The fact that the rise of RIC is something which is in a way inevitable. Not just on energy in the traditional sense that we understand, but also the new age energy which comes by way of the lithium-ion batteries that China controls. Now, and add to that the thawing of sort of tension between India and China. How soon before, in your opinion, can this RIC really be called a formidable bloc which sort of, becomes as powerful to give, let's say, the US or the European Union or the Gulf countries some sort of a real competition?
Kartik, I've been a great advocate of pushing for RIC. Of course, it's early days. The picture of Putin, Modi, and the Chinese head in Nanjing, created global waves. I think that set the context. It's important to understand that India has, so to say, removed many of the mindset barriers. Though on ground there are still challenges to Chinese investments, like P2 has not yet been withdrawn. Press Note 2, which is critical, in terms of bringing Chinese investments into India. It was brought at the height of Galwan crisis. So I don't think that will be withdrawn right away. But India is easing restrictions in terms of bringing more and more Indian partners to Chinese companies, like we've seen with MG Motors. I do see that playing out in the telecom sector, in the phone industry, where Chinese have a great head start. And I do see greater synergy between Russia, India, and China. All the three nations realize that they have together a greater chance of striking at the so-called American hegemony. And in that sense, conversations in the last 6 months versus last 6 years have pivoted to the larger idea that I am pushing for RIC as a greater hedge against any other champion in the global order.
All right, Shri, you
Of
don't
course,
seem
there
to
are
be in
challenges
agreement.
there because
Shri is nodding in disagreement. Let's get his view in as well.
My little caveat, Kartik, is that of course, each one has its own ambition to take the head table. So in that sense, there would be challenges. India has a problem with Russia wooing Pakistan, which is a recent development parallelly. And China and Pakistan are getting even closer to each other. So there are side stories, but RIC is closer to somewhat of being a reality today than in the past.
All right, Shri, you don't agree at all.
I have my take on this is, this, Kartik, as follows, Kartik. I don't think RIC is a bloc as yet, first of all. I think it is an opportunistic grouping of three countries which probably, feel that we need to come together at this point to counter certain geopolitical movements or an order that is being forced on them. So that's number one. As Rakesh himself admitted, every country has its own ambition, and I think when I say every country, it's largely China. China has the ambition of becoming the new superpower. It sees itself within a striking distance of overtaking US itself as the new global, a supercop and the global hegemon. Whether that happens or not is a different question. But China, as from an India perspective is concerned, China has also repeatedly shown that it's not a country that we can entirely trust. China has repeatedly violated a lot of agreements that it has signed with us, including on the territorial issues. And very clearly, China is at a position where, frankly, it needs others less than we need China, whether it is in terms of raw material, whether in terms of in terms of dominance in manufacturing, and now going forward, clean energy, innovation. Not to mention, rare earths and all those things. So I think this it will at best remain an uneasy, under the layer, it will remain uneasy grouping of three countries. I don't think we should go as far as to call it a bloc. I think it's right now coming together of people with some common interests, and it serves them at this point in time.
All right, Barnik, final word to you, and I want to actually end this conversation by bringing back US President Donald Trump into the discussion. And the optics that we've seen, right, not just here, but even in Shanghai during the SCO summit, you saw, the warmth between Prime Minister Modi, Russian President Vladimir Putin. You also had images coming with Chinese Premier Xi Jinping in the same frame, and sort of, the thawing of relationship in this, let's not call it a bloc for now, with this RIC really, coming to light, at least optically. Cut to visuals that we've seen of US President Donald Trump and Narendra Modi, again, warm embraces, patting each other's backs. In fact, US President Donald Trump pulling the chair for Prime Minister Narendra Modi to sit down and sort of, write the visitor's book. So, given the sort of bonhomie that is on display right now, yet again, with President Putin and Prime Minister Modi, and the fact that India is still far away from getting those 25% secondary sanctions knocked off, leave alone a trade deal, is this something which is going to act as an irritant to President Donald Trump? And is he going to try and vent it out in more ways that India would like?
I think let me just position this as a deliberate irritant, right? I think this is quite a deliberate
Whose attempt? President Putin's attempt? Prime Minister Modi's attempt?
I think it's more Prime Minister Modi's attempt.
Okay.
No, it's a joint attempt to.
We agree to disagree.
It's a joint byline.
I think let's be clear. I think one of the things to bring back the conversation to RIC, I believe that over a much longer time frame, the alliance between India and US is far deeper and will transcend administrations and transcend this immediate president, right? So let us not jump into forming anti-US alliances. I think the long-term India will benefit far more on being strategically aligned with the US than with China. Point number one. Point number two, it's important to note that I think what the US president now needs is a win. I think sanctions are proving to drive, or let's call it tariffs, not sanctions. Tariffs are proving to drive inflation, where he has lost significant support with voters. In fact, in the current estimates, right, if the midterms were to be held today, the Democrats would win 50 more seats than the last time and will comfortably take majority of the House. There's also a strong likelihood that the Senate may flip Democrat if the elections were held today. So, given these political dynamics, and it's all driven by cost of living, I think the US president has to be visible in reducing tariffs on countries. So I think the need for him to announce a trade deal where the 25 plus 25 is actually brought down to 16%, which is the deal on the table, is far more imperative for the Americans than for the Indians. So I think this is an important nudge given by our Prime Minister to the Americans to take notice. It's also important that we welcome the trade delegation from the US next week with as much warmth as we welcome the Americans, and India is very good at doing that. I'm quite hopeful that given the geopolitics and the internal political dynamics of the US, that there may be a trade deal announced with the US, maybe not by January end, but definitely before March end, because that's what the Americans and the US President now needs.
All right, a trade deal potentially by March end. After this,
there's no either or in diplomacy today.
Of course, so it's a fine balancing act, and that's what we've been calling it since morning.
We must and we will continue to woo US like never before.
Right.
But we must parallelly build, reinforce BRICS, reinforce Quad again, and reinforce, RIC, an idea as of now.
RIC as an idea, rebuild BRICS, which again is not something that US President Donald Trump likes at all. And of course, Quad is something that we haven't seen much progress on.
No, I think
anyway.
BRICS, I think India is the president or the current chairman.
That's
of
right.
BRICS,
That's right. The next one.
It presents again
like
a huge
someone
opportunity
said,
for
Kartik, finally, it's the economy stupid.
Yeah.
So I think whether it is US, whether it is Russia, whether it is India, I think people elect governments to give them a prosperous life.
Right.
They don't want wars, or they don't want anything which doesn't allow them to prosper as citizens of these nations.